Welcome to the Heads Up podcast, brought to you by the National Migraine Centre, the only UK charity treating headache and migraine. Visit our website to book your appointment with a world-class headache doctor wherever you are in the UK. There is no need for a referral. You can refer yourself. Our headache specialist doctors are looking forward to helping you soon.
Welcome to this episode of Heads Up podcast and this new series that we're just launching today is about focusing on cluster headache. So as a headache specialist, I've become increasingly aware of the impact of cluster headache on people of all ages, actually. When I first started as a headache specialist, there was a myth that cluster headache only affected men of a certain age with a certain colour eyes. And this has all been found to be completely nonsense. But I still hear very sad stories about people who haven't had the diagnosis very quickly and who've struggled to get treatment. So we're very passionate at the National Migraine Centre of raising awareness about cluster headache. So I'm delighted today to welcome Mr. Chris Addison, who many of you will know very well. And I'm going to ask Chris to introduce himself.
Thanks, Katie. I'm Chris Addison. I am variously have been at different times a stand-up comedian and actor, writer. These days, mostly a director of TV and film, and a cluster headache sufferer.
And I'm very delighted to say that I've followed your career with great delight over the years. But I was also quite shocked and feeling sad for you that you have had experience of cluster headache. But it's really lovely that you've come to share that on the podcast. So first of all, can you say, when did it start? Because I know that you have migraine as well as cluster headache. So which came first?
I think migraine came first, and migraine came quite late to me. I mean, both of them came quite late. As I understand matters with cluster headaches, it's often seen that men have them. Men, as you said in your introduction, it's quite often men who are mentioned, but people tend to get them in their younger years, let's say, sort of, I guess, adolescence onwards, and then they kind of clear up around your 40s or what have you. It was sort of in my 40s that both of these things turned up for me. So migraine has turned up so far not in the form of a headache, mercifully, but as the visual migraine version, which a lot of people will know and have experienced, and being the sort of small filament that suddenly turns up flashing away in your vision that grows and grows and grows over a period of half an hour to an hour or whatever, and then clears. I got that, I suppose, a few years ahead, and then I ended up with chronic migraine. And when I first went to the doctor about cluster headaches, I was also going about another condition, which turned out to be chronic migraine. And I assumed that those things were similar. I would say they turned up in my probably mid to late 40s. Is when actually that started to manifest itself for me. I'm in my mid 50s now, so I've been suffering from cluster headache for a few years. Actually, when I went to the doctor, the chronic migraine thing cleared up with treatment, but cluster has sadly hung around.
And so, do you remember your first cluster headache? Do you remember sort of thinking, hang on a minute, this is different. I've been used to these visual auras and the chronic migraine. This is different. And what made you kind of think that was different?
Well, I didn't connect it to the migraine at that point. I didn't connect it certainly didn't connect it to the visual auras. And I don't think at that point, when it first turned up for me, I don't think I knew that the other thing I was suffering from was chronic migraine. The way that chronic migraine presented itself to me was if I physically I made a physical effort to do something, if I strained to do anything physical, I would get a feeling in my head like it was about to explode. I had a feeling of pressure under my skull that felt like if I continue to strain, or if I strain further, this is, my brains will be on the wall. And I would get a similar feeling if I sort of bent down or was upside down or anything like that. So anywhere where the blood rushes to your head, essentially. And I didn't know that that was a migraine. I only knew that the visual auras were a migraine because my optician told me.
Uh-huh.
And uh, so when the cluster first turned up, I sort of thought of it as being probably part of the same thing. I just thought, well, it's my head. Something
Yeah.
weird is happening to my head. It must be something to do with that. But the very first sets of clusters that I dealt with, because of where it happens, and for me, as with a lot of people, the way that a cluster headache tends to be is that it's like somebody has taken a knife and pushed it in my case, into my left eye, and then slowly starts to sort of turn a knife over a long period of 3 to 4 hours, whatever. And it felt like a sinus issue because of
Mhm.
where it is in the head. It felt like it must. I remember just thinking, this is ridiculous. Why is it like this? And I would take analgesics. I would take Sinutab or whatever to try and clear these sinuses, not knowing what in fact it was. And when I went to the doctor with these, the chronic migraine was well, but actually they both took a bit of diagnosing.
Mm.
The GPs sort of weren't really equipped to help me because they didn't really know that much about these conditions, certainly not the cluster headaches. And I sort of had to go back, I was given a couple of things to try. So I was giving a sort of a nasal spray, a
Like a decongestant
yeah, it was sort of like or like the kind of thing that you'd give someone who's suffering from hay fever.
or a
Um,
steroid nasal
yeah,
spray.
so a
Yeah.
steroid nasal spray is one of the things that I was given. That didn't work. There was a point where I was told that it was caffeine, probably, and I knocked out caffeine for a long time, and that didn't work. And eventually, I was sent for an MRI scan down at the hospital in Orpington, a long way into this process. That was clear. So they sort of kicked me upstairs to one of the consultants at the headache clinic in Bromley, in South London, where I am, and I ended up with a telephone conversation. I think this is probably around COVID. So
Mm.
lots of it was sort of telephone conversations, and this rather sort of high-handed consultant of a very old school type of sort of consultant said, no, 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 this is all nonsense, 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 nonsense. This is what you've got, and explained the two conditions
Uh-huh.
and what drugs might be useful. So we dealt with the chronic migraine with amitriptyline. As I'm saying that, I'm looking down at my desk and I can see some old packets of amitriptyline there,
Oh.
and which indicates how often I clear my desk. I took that for a while. That helped that, and I was given drugs to deal with the cluster headache, but they didn't really deal with the cluster headache in any sort of useful way. I was put on verapamil, quite a low dose actually of verapamil, as it turns out,
Mm.
uh, which is generally a blood pressure medication. It's the intention being, as my layman's understanding of it is, the intention being, well, it's blood pressure that's causing problems in your head. Let's keep the blood pressure down. So
Mm.
that's there as a
I'm going to interrupt you there because
yeah, do
I don't think we really know why verapamil helps, because it isn't about high blood pressure.
yeah, okay.
But it is, you're right, it is genuine, generally the one gold standard preventer of a cluster headache, but it's not related to the lowering of the blood pressure.
It's interesting, and I've sort of been taken off it subsequently by the people under whose care I am now, and I was given that in conjunction with prednisolone, which I was given as a steroid treatment that I could take in the event of a cluster turning up. So, for people who don't know how cluster headaches work, essentially, cluster headaches are bouts of these headaches that turn up for a period of time and then go away for another period of time, then come back. So that they present in clusters, hence the name cluster headaches. That's right, I think. Is that
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
And so I was given the prednisolone for when a cluster turns up, and it doesn't really work, and it didn't really work, and the only sort of useful curative that I've ever been given took years to get to,
Yeah.
and it happened to be a conversation with a GP who happened to know.
Mm.
And I was just lucky, really. I was
Mm.
in the middle of a bout whilst I was filming a show, so I was behind the camera directing, and these headaches were turning up once or twice a day. Normally for me, like a lot of people, I get cluster headaches kind of an hour after I go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Quite often they're called alarm clock headaches
Yeah.
because that is a very typical way that these things happen to people. That's usually how it happens for me. When it gets bad, I can also get a, a headache in the day
Yeah.
as well, and that's what was happening to me on set whilst I was trying to, you know, um,
Well,
direct and work. Yeah, do my actual work. And so I was sort of desperate at this point, and the GP said to me, "Oh, well, you should. I'll prescribe you some zolmitriptan." And I'd never heard of it. I keep it as it's one in my pocket at all times. One of these
yeah.
little fellas, which is a sort of nasal spray, one shot nasal spray that you get. And I was prescribed zolmitriptan, and I can't tell you how life changing that was,
Mm.
because I can remember the very first time that I took it. I had a nighttime attack. I'd gone into the spare room and I was sort of rocking back and forth on the um, bed, praying for the end of this thing. Because again, unlike migraines, with cluster headaches, you can't lie in a darkened room. You can't lie down. You can't stand up. You can't move. You can't do anything. There's nothing that you can do
Mm.
that will distract from the pain, really. And so I took this nasal spray, and it takes about 10 minutes for the nasal spray to act. And over that 10 minutes, I was thinking, it's not working. It's not working. None of this is working. Nothing works. Nothing works. This,
Mm.
this thing is unbeatable. And it sort of around 10 minutes, it was like, I don't really know how to describe it physically. When I'm sort of talking to people in person, I clench my fists one on top of the other and then just sort of gently release them. It was like that. It was like something that was so scrunched up, so completely contained, was just let go, like, and,
Mm.
and became smoke. Nothing,
Mm.
nothing. It just disappeared, and it remains one of the most miraculous moments of my life, along with the birth of my children. It was so incredibly life changing
Mm.
to have that. Now the problem is it's a very strong drug,
Yeah.
and when it's prescribed for migraine, you'll notice that in the things that you in the boxes that you get, I've got a load of boxes, don't I? Big pharmacy bag of these boxes. In these boxes, it says, you can say it on the front. It sort of it says to you, don't take more than 4 of these a month. And that's a really scary thing to read about any drug, particularly a drug that you are feeling like you need to take twice a day
Mm.
for a week, 2 weeks, however long this bout is going to last. And it's been interesting to me talking to neurologists since, who've said to me, when I've explained that fear, who've said to me, "Oh no, they don't mean you.
No.
You just keep taking it."
I don't mean you.
Yeah,
So the reason that's on there is because it does have a bad effect on people with migraine if they
right.
take them on more than 10 days in a month. So, I mean, obviously, pharmaceutical companies are trying to cover themselves, but with people with cluster headache, we never make that
Yeah,
limitation. So we should be able to take them every single day throughout a bout, even if a bout goes on for 3 months, which unfortunately for some people it does.
yeah,
Um, but it's interesting to me that you were given zolmitriptan nasal spray
mm,
some many years after you were diagnosed with cluster
yeah,
headache,
yeah.
but you had never, and to this day, as far as I'm aware, haven't been offered sumatriptan injections.
No, it's come up in discussions when I've been out of bout, right? So,
Right.
I'm now, I had a particularly bad year with this last year. It was it was really bad from the sort of November, end of November 1924. It feels like 1924, end of
Not that old.
November 2024. I had a bout that was sort of 6 weeks long, which is so it went all over Christmas, all over New Year, and it was um, twice as long as any bout that I'd ever had. And I got to a point where I was going, I don't know what to do with this, and I was I was sort of because I was taking so much of this zolmitriptan, and I was so worried about it, and I didn't have access to any other non-pharmaceutical curatives. So, oxygen is the other thing that is prescribed. 100% oxygen is prescribed for sufferers. There you go. And there's my tank
Your
rocking away in the
cylinder
background.
handy.
I have an oxygen cylinder in my office. I had to have a man come around and make sure that the house is safe and that it's not going to blow up or anything like
Yeah.
that. And I've got a special mask that I have imported from the United States
Hmm.
on there. Um, but so because I didn't have any of that stuff during that first long bout, I sort of a friend of mine who had been and is mercifully no longer a cluster sufferer said, "Yeah, I used the poor man's oxygen." He said, "I used to go for a run." And so sort of, Christmas morning, I was at 2 in the morning, I was kind of charging around Beckenham and Bromley,
Hmm.
doing sort of, 10 miles, trying to get my, the rate of oxygen in and of course, it doesn't work. And you
Doesn't.
look like a lunatic because you're walking through the middle of the night at some speed with sunglasses on because, the
Hmm.
bright light is too much. It's pretty harsh
Yeah.
stuff. And what worried me about it, one of the reasons I was particularly worried is because on that occasion that I had been first prescribed it and taken, a couple of bouts. Actually, no, I lie. It's the second time. But I had it sort of for a week when I was filming again, and I took two a day for a week, and then the bout cleared up, and I stopped, and I went full cold turkey. Like I spent a morning thinking I was going to vomit. Just sort
Oh,
of sitting in the corner in three coats,
yeah.
shivering, and wondering what on earth was going on before my wife pointed out to me, "You've just come off a very heavy medication
Yeah.
regimen. That's what's happened to you." So, like, I didn't want that. I didn't really want that to be happening to me again, and hence the sort of wandering around in the middle of the night, trying to
Yeah.
find alternative ways of dealing with it.
Yeah. One of the things that very much comes out from what you're describing is that the agitation and the restlessness, which is one of the key things that we as headache specialists ask about, because it really is so different from migraine. So people with migraine come in and then we say, "What do you do when you have an attack?" And they say, "Well, I try very hard to stay still. If I can, I go and lie down or I go in a dark room. I have to creep around, trying not to look at the light and going very gently and quietly." People with cluster headaches say, "Oh, I can't possibly stay still. I have to move. I
Yeah,
rock, I bang my head, sometimes
yeah,
punch my head,
yeah,
sometimes bang my head against the wall." So
yeah,
it's a very key question for clinicians to be aware of, I think, because there are people such as yourself, and I know many now from my work at National Migraine Centre, who have migraine, but who also develop cluster headache. And I think
yeah,
these are the people who often get told, "Oh, it's migraine, go away, take these migraine tablets." And of course, they
yeah,
don't work in the same way.
yeah, absolutely. And it's remarkable the number of people who if you end up sort of talking about this for whatever reason, people go, "Oh, I think that might be," they recognize something in
Yeah.
it. And I think, well, I don't know what, I think the statistic is something like, it's something like 1 in 1,000 people suffers
Yes.
from it. Is that right? Is that
That
broad,
is
broad?
right. Yes.
So it's unusual to come across other people who do, and it's also unusual for a clinician or
Mm.
a general practitioner to come
Yeah.
across anyone who does at all.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to see how it's possible to misdiagnose it, but it does lead to years and years of excruciating pain
Yeah.
for people. I consider, like I say, last year was very, very difficult for me, and I had a bout that was 4 months long,
Mm.
lasting from the beginning of June to the middle of October. And and I'm really conscious of the fact that to some degree uh, it's awful for me. Like it's awful, but there are people who have it so much worse, like whose levels are so much worse, and who have it as a chronic
Mm.
condition. And um, the idea of it's so scary because
Mm.
it's coming, you can feel it, it's coming, there's nothing you can do about it. And it's very, very difficult to communicate what the experience of it is. And that is why, like, one of the things about this condition, I think, is that you don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
You can hope that it's going to disappear because that is certainly a profile of it. That's
Yeah.
one possible profile of it. But there are also people for whom it's so out of control and it's so misdiagnosed that they lose jobs, they lose marriages, they lose their lives
Mm.
over it. It's an extraordinarily destructive condition when it gets to a certain
Mm.
stage, and you never know where it's going to go. It is terrifying.
Yeah. We are sometimes aware of people saying, I can't do this any longer. And it has been called the suicide headache in the
Yeah,
past.
yeah,
And people who don't understand about it, I think, can quite glibly say, well, you don't die of a headache. And actually, when you're having this excruciating pain, which when they've done questionnaires, how would you rate your pain compared to other pains that people have experienced? It comes way higher than childbirth,
yeah,
broken bones,
yeah,
stab wounds.
yeah,
There's a whole lot of things that people have experienced that are painful, but cluster headache is right at the top of the list for
yeah,
most people.
yeah.
And that is terrifying when you can't get away from it.
Yes, that's the thing that you can't get away from it, and that there isn't a silver bullet for it, right? There is no panacea that works for everybody,
Mm.
and what works for you and doesn't work for you can change.
Yes.
Um, so the discovery of something like the triptans is incredible, right? That's it's a sort of miracle when it happens, but also you do know that, well, that I'm terrified of the notion of it stopping working for me. Like, what do I do if the triptans don't if the triptans don't work? It took me a long time to get prescribed oxygen, and actually I ended up using it for the first time in the summer when I had that very long bout, and it took a lot of figuring out, and there wasn't really anyone to help me figure it out.
Mm.
There wasn't. I'm sure that there are brilliant organisations, sufferers organisations. There's the wonderful Ouch UK over here in the
Yeah.
UK. There's Cluster Busters over in the States. There are organisations in plenty of places, and you can go on Reddit and you'll find people who there are support groups there that will point you in the right direction for various things. But it's not just oxygen isn't just a matter of, oh, I'll just breathe some oxygen, right?
Yeah.
There's a technique to it. There are ways that it needs to work. Not only that, but the masks, the non-rebreathable masks that we get in the UK just really aren't up to the job. They're just not up to the job. The masks that are up to the job, which is one of these fellas. There you go. That's me discovering that the line is trapped under the tank. That's quite good. We had this conversation. Now I know that Mark's one of these fellas,
Yeah.
which is this is not standard issue. This is something that a cluster sufferer in the United States has built. And so for people who aren't able to see what this is, it's an oxygen mask with a sort of rubber seal around the mouthpiece itself, but a much, much, much bigger bag, sort of
Oh,
twice the size than you would normally get on a non-rebreathable mask. And the consequence is you can breathe more
yeah.
oxygen, which is important when you can only deliver it to yourself at a maximum of 12 or 15 liters
Yeah. Yeah.
a minute, because the flow is
Yeah.
such an important thing. So like the infrastructure is sort of there, but not quite there. Once
Chris,
you're
have you ever tried the demand on demand valve? So that is another way of having the
Yeah,
oxygen some people find better than the mask. If they don't want the mask on their face,
yeah,
then the valve, but they're not easily available. And I know Ouch are
no.
working very, very hard to try and change that to make them available all over the UK.
That's the key thing. So I'm now under the care of the team at King's College, which is as my friend um, who was the so my friend John Niven is a brilliant novelist, and his novels I cannot recommend highly enough. Nonetheless, I would recommend most of all his insanely brilliant and heartbreaking memoir, Oh Brother, which is about him and his brother Gary. Now, his brother Gary was a cluster sufferer who took his own life
Mm.
as a consequence of the disease. And John himself suffered for a while from it. And he did everything that he could to help his brother. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. It's extremely funny and very heartbreaking, beautifully written. It's a remarkable work. But John said to me at one point, I said, in the middle of about, I sort of texted him and went, who's the guy? Who's the guy you went to see with Gary? Who's that guy? The guy? And he sort of he messaged me back going, Chris, that guy, he's the guy you go to if you're an interesting patient. You don't want to be an interesting patient. But indeed, I am now under the care of people who have interesting patients, and I've sort of spoken to them. I've started a conversation with them about a demand valve because
Yeah.
it makes the most sense. It's a funny thing when you're taking oxygen. This is getting a little bit into too much detail possibly, but when you're using the oxygen, there's a kind of you're not able to concentrate on dealing with the pain because you're concentrating on the sort of technicalities. Is there enough oxygen in the bag? Am I breathing too quickly? Am I not breathing quickly enough for this to go
Mm.
in? But if you have a demand valve, all of those questions are irrelevant.
Yeah.
So I would very much like to get
Yeah.
hold of one of those,
Yeah.
but like you can't get it yourself because
Yeah.
they're not they won't give them to anybody. There are 300 or 400 quid anyway, and you have to have your
Yeah.
tank fitted correctly for it. So
One of the things I was reading about the other day is when people are using the mask, occasionally they have been
yeah,
known to kind of the pain goes and they fall asleep because often these
yeah,
attacks come through the night and the
yeah,
mask is still stuck on their face and then the
yes,
oxygen is wasted.
yeah,
So by not putting the elastic round your head, if you hold the mask,
yeah,
then if
yeah,
you fall asleep, it comes away and then
yeah.
you're not
Yeah,
still.
and that's exactly why this sort of specially designed one doesn't have a strap on it
Yeah.
for that precise
Yeah.
reason. So yeah, people do waste oxygen, and also it isn't good for you to continue to breathe
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
100% oxygen. Which seems counterintuitive. I
Yeah.
still don't get it myself, but apparently that's the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, yes, almost always the first advice that other oxygen users give to fellow cluster sufferers is cut the uh, cut the band off because
Yes. Yeah.
you don't
Exactly.
want to fall
You don't
asleep
want
with
to
it on.
be fall asleep with that on. So, Chris, coming back to your personal experience, how much have you shared this with people that you work with and with family, and do they get it? Or have you found that there's generally an understanding, or do you have to spend a lot of time explaining about cluster headache?
You do have to spend a lot of time explaining it to people, and it's difficult to explain it to people, not because it's a hard thing to explain, but because if you are saying, listen, this thing is the worst pain you could experience, it does feel like you're being overdramatic. And
Mm.
it's hard not to, you want people to understand the facts of what's happening without I don't know, becoming an object of sympathy, possibly, or
Yeah.
feeling like you look like somebody who's kind of telling a tall tale, right?
Yeah.
So I've had to. So actually, it's been broadly positive that
Mm.
my experience of that. In that, so I was making a television program out in Ireland for the summer, and that was, the last bout that I had coincided with that, and I mean, the way that I first used oxygen was because somebody in the Irish production company happened to know a doctor whose partner had cluster headaches, who immediately went, right, I'm ordering him oxygen, and 8 tanks turned up at my
Right.
little sort of flat in Dublin, and again, it's Ireland is such a small country. As my fellow director on the show, Nyasa Hardiman, said to me, Ireland, she said, you can go nowhere and do nothing, meaning everybody knows everybody. And as it happened, her sister was the top neurologist in
Yeah.
Ireland. So I ended up, being able to access steroid drips in hospital, which were in fact totally ineffective.
Yeah.
But I felt like people were
People were listening.
listening and they were kind of having me under their care. And so there are a number of folk responses, right? Because there's not a lot understood and there aren't that many medical pathways that you can go down with cluster headache. The cluster sufferers communities have kind of built their own over the last few decades. So there are all sorts of kind of effectively old wives' tales about what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
One of the things that people often say is energy drink, like a
Yeah.
can of Monster. All
Yeah.
right? A can of Monster downed as soon as the thing turns up, like that, quick as you can, get it in your system. That'll do you. That'll help. And in fact, when so obviously I'm not Gen Z, so Monster is not my drink. And but my assistant directors on the show filled their truck with cans of Monster, and so there were a number of occasions on set where I would go, "Can I?" And they'd hand me a sort of
Yeah.
non-refrigerated, in order to allow it to go down quicker, can of this stuff. And whether or not that's, whether that was psychosomatic or whatever, I don't know. But the point that I'm making isn't really whether or not that works. It's just that the level of care and understanding that
Yes.
people
Yeah.
brought to it.
I mean, I follow on certain forums and I hear patients discussing in clinic about the things that they've tried. And you're right. I mean, there's nothing that works for everybody, but there are
No.
lots of things that people have tried and say, well, this worked for me. And I think when you're desperate and wanting to be out of this excruciating pain, you will
Yeah.
try anything, which makes people a little bit vulnerable to things which are either a bit unsafe or
Yeah.
possibly even veering onto the illegal. And
Well, but that's
we
a massive thing.
yeah.
That's a huge, huge, huge thing. There's a big part of the cluster sufferer community that is interested in the use of psilocybin. And psilocybin is the psychedelic substance that turns up in magic mushrooms and things like that.
Mhm.
And magic mushrooms are a class A substance. They weren't always, but they are now a class A substance. So possession of magic mushroom is like possession of heroin, right?
Yeah.
So so the problem is that over the course of sort of 20 years or so, cluster busters, as they're known, who are sort of United States based organization, have undertaken pretty good, albeit non-scientific and anecdotal research into how efficacious the use of psilocybin is, how you might go about using it, and so on. And they have kind of, over the course of a couple of decades, come up with various systems that they recommend that people use to try and use this substance at a low level, so a non-psychedelic level,
Mm.
to not as a curative, but actually as a sort of prophylactic. So the purpose of psilocybin, as they see it, is to is to bust the cluster, hence cluster busters, is when the cluster begins to turn up, or when you know you're due one, because some people have them absolutely like clockwork at often the equinoxes for
Yeah.
some reason. If you know that it's coming up and it's your time of year, or you can feel the shadows, as they're known, that taking, specific small substance of this stuff has the effect for some people of completely destroying the cluster. The cluster just doesn't turn up, and that is like for people who suffer from the disease, it is like I can't really express what a gift that is. Right,
Mm.
it's huge.
Mm.
However,
However,
nobody much
yeah.
is researching psilocybin. They're not.
Yeah.
There's a German study from a while back.
Yeah.
Nobody much is putting the money in terms of the drug companies or anybody else come to that into researching how this might be used, how it might be synthesized, how it, what could be done to make this an actually prescribable substance. And the problem is, which is what you're really saying, Katie, I think that therefore it doesn't matter if you've got a bunch of people saying, "Hey, this works." Like, it's not scientific. And the piece of mushroom, I've never done it because I'm too scared of that kind of thing. But the piece of whatever, you don't know how much psilocybin is in any given bit of mushroom. You don't. And so you don't know what you're doing to yourself. And you don't, I mean, it's, but the fact that that there is a lead there that seems to have real potential for curing this astonishing thing,
Yeah.
and no one's following it up,
No one's
is
looking. Yeah.
so frustrating.
I mean, that I was saying to you before we press record that there are some people now in Europe using psilocybin for depression,
Yeah.
quite legitimately. So I think there's beginning to be a bit of an interest in this. But of course, in the UK, it's illegal. In some
Yeah.
of the states in America, I believe it's not as illegal. But
Right.
so we can't advise people to go down that route. But it is something that I'm going to be watching, and
Yeah.
seeing if more research is happening. But going back to what you were saying about research, being done, the funding of research into cluster headache generally is minuscule
Yeah.
compared to the research funding for conditions like multiple sclerosis,
Yeah.
which is about the same frequency. So about
That's interesting.
the same prevalence of MS as cluster headache, and
That's interesting.
vast amounts of money put into research on multiple sclerosis, but not anything like that into research on cluster headache. So again, I think we come back, and I hear this from people with cluster quite often. Why are we calling it cluster headache? Because there's such a stigma around the word headache.
Mm.
And it feels like it's not expressing the agony that they feel and the distress that they feel. But nobody has come up with a better, and I mean, it's been called various other things in the past, none of which have really been particularly helpful. And I just wonder whether we should call it cluster torture, because it feels more like a torture than
Yeah.
it's not just a headache. We get
Yeah.
this with migraine as well. It's just a headache. And of course,
Yeah.
migraine is so much more of a whole body experience. But in the way that you describe it and the way that I've heard other people describe cluster, sticking headache on just makes it feel as if
Yeah.
it's just a little thing in your head and it'll come and go and, get on with life sort of thing.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Like, the thing is, nobody knows. Like, I mean, most of us don't know what multiple sclerosis means,
Yeah.
but we know that it is we know that it's a label for an appalling condition. That's the
Yeah.
thing that we know. So if it's like, whatever, what is it called? Is it trigeminal cephalgia? What is it called? Is that
Neuralgia.
neuralgia?
Trigeminal neuralgia.
Trigeminal neuralgia, right? So if it's like, so it's TN or whatever it is, like,
Yeah.
you need to be able to, connect the a phrase with a disease. The problem is the disease end of it. I think I completely agree with you about the headache bit, that in terms of sort of terminology. But the problem is that you can see what multiple sclerosis is. You can see that. You can see what an appalling condition it is. You can be shown people who are suffering at different stages and how that is affecting their experience as a human. And you can't see that with cluster, and you can't see it with migraine really.
Mm.
And so it's a much more
Mm.
difficult one to sort of explain to people.
Yeah.
And which is why podcasts like this and awareness days and all of this are so important.
Yeah.
But it does need, it needs somebody in a position to actually do something about it, to take it up as a subject. There are people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So we need to keep shouting about it.
Mm.
And again, thank you very much for coming and sharing your experience. So just to kind of wind up a little bit now,
Yeah.
are there any sort of lessons that you've learned from your experience or messages you'd like to give to people who are wondering whether they've got cluster? I mean, one of the things I always say is if you think you've got cluster headache and you're not sure, just refer yourself to us at the National Migraine Centre if
Yeah.
you're in the UK, because we are very happy to prioritise people with cluster headache. We try and see them within 2 weeks. We're a charity. They can come on a donation basis, and we have the knowledge and expertise to give them a plan and to liaise with GPs and get referrals into the NHS if that's needed. So anything that you'd like to kind of highlight?
Well, I would say, I mean, I think what you're doing there is so valuable. Like to be able to offer any kind of shortcut to being understood
Yeah,
about it. I mean, being finding a diagnosis, being believed, being understood. Those are all very vital things, and to be able to do that so quickly is wonderful. I would say, though, to people that if you think you have it, um, go on the Ouch website, ouch.org.uk, who's the organisation for the understanding of cluster headache, and they are fabulous. It's not a massively active website because it's a tiny organisation. It's a tiny, there aren't that many of us who suffer from it, and lots of us who suffer from it probably don't know we suffer from it, and those of us who do know maybe don't know about Ouch or whatever. But there's plenty of resources on there that will help point you in the right direction, will help you talk to your clinician in a way that allows you to access the things that you need to access, because a big problem is the going around the houses part of the
yeah,
the diagnosis. And if you're able to go in asking specific questions, saying specific things, that will be helpful, if nothing else, in eliminating it as a possibility if it turns out it isn't cluster headache.
yeah,
And so, I mean, that's the UK version. There are plenty of websites on all sorts of in all sorts of countries. There are organisations, and as I said earlier, there's Reddit, there's forums elsewhere.
yeah,
But I think Ouch are particularly good, not least because they have the participation at whatever level of some of the people in the UK who are the most interested in research,
yes.
who come and talk at the annual conference of Ouch, which is happening this year on the 14th of June, I believe, in Birmingham.
In Birmingham. Yep. It's on
So
the
if
website. All the details and registration's open
yeah,
now, I believe.
and it's like 15 quid to go, or it's half price if you're a member of Ouch, and membership of Ouch is nothing. So like it's so worth it's so worth being a part of that, and because not least because the more places that there are for the community of sufferers to meet and swap stories and ideas, the more we're going to be able to build a voice, actually, and and that is a crucial step in getting in getting research underway. But it strikes me, if I were a drug company, the 1 in 1,000 people is a pretty good bet
Yeah,
in terms of selling, particularly something like this that isn't
yeah,
a this is a recurring disease.
yeah,
Once you have this, it's not like if you're lucky it goes away
yeah,
at some point, if you're lucky, and it develops in other ways in other people. A fairly typical thing is for the bouts, for you to have longer distances between the bouts, but the bouts themselves to be longer,
intense.
and yeah, more intense. Uh, there's so you've still got it, right? If I were a drug company, I would be absolutely putting money into this, because um there are enough people who suffer from this
Yeah.
and who need it.
Just going back to what we were talking about, the Ouch conference, one of the things that sparked me to do this kind of spotlight series that we've worked on cluster headache, launching on Cluster Headache Awareness Day, was that I met several people who have children who have cluster
Oh,
headache. And we also
oh,
have one of our colleagues who has recently had her second child, and she's had cluster headaches from
oh,
before the birth of her first child. So she's featuring in one of my later interviews.
oh,
But
that's
but
brilliant.
one of the lovely things about the Ouch conference is that connection between people, and oh, other people are like me. It's such an isolating thing having a,
It is, yeah.
such a painful condition when you're in bout. And then in between bout, of course, people may well be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
So
That's the
that's
crazy part of it, is that like, You are fine. So I'm all right, right? For the moment, I'm all right. We're recording this in, middle of March, which means that what I've been out about for 5 months, which is sort of miraculous, actually. And
Mm.
there was a point in the summer where I just thought, this is it, this is it.
Yeah.
This is me now. I'm chronic, which was just so terrifying,
Mm.
a thought. But I know that it's coming.
Mm.
Right, I'm okay now. I'm okay, and I've got to try and enjoy my life and live my life properly, which I do. I'm not in a I'm not in a corner shaking or anything.
Yeah.
Not now. I've got the zolmitriptan out my system, but I know that it's there. It's there in the
Yeah.
in the background, and there's a thing that happens. There's a physiological thing, and I don't know if it's psychosomatic. I don't know if it is actually physiological, whereby you get what are called shadows, and in the area that you uh, usually have the headache, you feel, I suppose it's like the mildest possible version of that headache, just sort of fluttering about, and it's like it's reminding you,
Mm.
don't get too clever because
Yeah.
I am here.
I'm still
Um,
lurking.
I'm still lurking,
Yeah.
and everybody who lives with cluster knows that. And even I'd be
Mm.
interested to talk to John about whether he feels like it's done now for him, or
Yeah.
whether, and if he does feel like that, how long it took him after his last bout before he went, I think I might be free.
Yeah.
Um, but I the other day I just went out to the theatre, and I realised that I put a different pair of trousers on, and I didn't have a nasal spray in my pocket, and it didn't ruin my evening. I didn't go into a panic. I didn't run home, but I
Mm.
did. But I could feel it. I could feel it on my shoulder the whole time.
Uh-huh.
I don't have it. I don't have it. I don't have the thing.
Yeah.
If it goes, I'm absolutely screwed here. And
Yeah.
I think about that. I think about what happens if I'm driving? What happens if,
Yeah.
and it has happened to me at points where I can't really have this. I
Yeah.
can't have this happen
Can't
now.
do this now.
I can't do this
Yeah.
stuff just from a practical point of view,
Yeah.
let alone the pain of it all. There's a very difficult, but I do think meeting other sufferers is good because, as wonderful and as supportive as people around you can be, they don't know. They don't
Yeah.
know. And yeah, it's good to not feel alone about it and to be able to
Yeah.
explain those things.
On that note, I think we will say thank you very much once again, Chris, for joining us and sharing your story. And let's hope that we can get more people the help that they need and get more interest in research going forward.
Absolutely. And keep doing the work you're doing. It's so vital.
Coming up next time on Heads Up, we hear from 9-year-old Alexander and his mum Mel about what it's like growing up with cluster headache and the impact it has on family life. Thank you for listening to the Heads Up podcast. Visit our website to book your appointment with a world-class headache doctor wherever you are in the UK. There is no need for a referral. You can refer yourself. Our headache specialist doctors are looking forward to helping you soon.